Imagine settling into the plush leather of a first-class cabin, ready to close your eyes before a long flight only to be told you don't belong here. That happened to Malcolm Raye, a soft-spoken tech visionary whose quiet confidence hides a lifetime of resilience. How does a man who built the very systems an airline relies on end up being dragged off his own seat for the comfort of someone else? What happens when dignity becomes a bargaining chip and the sky itself seems too small for justice tonight? We follow Malcolm from that shocking moment at Gate 17A through a viral storm, boardroom showdowns, and a movement that transforms an entire industry. You'll meet the people who stood beside him, the witness who recorded every word, the ally who refused to stay silent, and the crew who learned that respect isn't a privilege, it's a right. This is not just a story of one man's fight. It's the story of how one act of courage can ripple through thousands of lives. Ready to dive into a journey of injustice, redemption, and revolution at 38,000 feet. Hit like, share with friends who value dignity, and subscribe. Now let's take off together. The low hum of jet engines outside Gate 17A was strangely soothing. Malcolm Raye stood still, one hand on the leather strap of his carry-on, eyes scanning the boarding zone of SkyLynx Flight 482 bound for Washington, D.C. At 6'2", with a calm presence and salt and pepper curls trimmed close to his head, he didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. He never did. That was part of his power-quiet strength, rooted deep. The gate agent barely looked up as she scanned his boarding pass. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Raye," she said mechanically. He gave a soft nod and entered the jet bridge. Inside the aircraft, warm lighting spilled across plush, cream-colored seats of the SkyLynx first-class cabin. The airline's flagship route sleek, exclusive, quiet. He found seat 1A, stowed his bag, and sat with a soft exhale. The kind of exhale that only comes after too many weeks of noise, decisions, meetings, and silence, the kind that claws at your bones. For the first time in 3 weeks, Malcolm allowed his eyes to close. He never dressed to impress, not here. Navy blue knit polo, gray slacks, no watch today, but still some people noticed. Some always noticed. He opened his eyes again just as Vanessa Cole, the lead flight attendant, entered the cabin, mid-30s, polished, polite, except this time her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Excuse me," she said, her voice just above a whisper. "I believe there's been a mix-up. This seat is reserved." Malcolm looked at her, puzzled but calm. "No, I don't believe so. This is seat 1A. My ticket confirms it." She glanced at the printed manifest in her hand, then at him, then back down. "Yes. Well, it's just that. Ms. Ellison is a long-time Diamond guest. She always sits here. It's her preferred seat." Malcolm sat up straighter, his tone still even. "I boarded early. The seat wasn't occupied. Yes, but—" Vanessa hesitated, adjusting the cuff of her uniform. "Ms. Ellison hasn't boarded yet. We'd like to seat you just across the aisle in 1C. It's still first class." Malcolm looked toward 1C. The seat was fine. It was also directly under the overhead bin that never stayed shut. He'd flown this aircraft type before. More than that, he knew exactly what this was. A small smile formed, quiet and controlled. "I'll remain in 1A, he said softly. Vanessa's smile thinned. "Sir, I'm asking you, respectfully." "I'm declining, respectfully." There was a pause. Tension lived in the air now, brittle and unsaid. That's when Brent Taylor, the purser, stepped into the aisle. "Mr. Raye, is it?" His voice was firmer. "We're going to need your cooperation here. Ms. Ellison has priority status and a strong relationship with the airline." Malcolm met his gaze. No sharpness, just stillness. "I'm not moving." I have a valid ticket, and I boarded without issue. I've flown this route often. Mr. Taylor, I know the seat I selected. Behind them, boarding continued. Passengers shuffled in quietly, unaware of what was beginning to unfold. That's when she arrived. Margot Ellison, 56 sharp black heels, designer coat draped over her arm, and the air of someone used to rearranging the world around her. Her lips pursed the moment she saw him. "Oh, that's my seat," she said, loud enough for Rose behind her to hear. Vanessa rushed forward. "Ms. Ellison, we're handling it. Please take a seat for now." Margot's eyes didn't leave Malcolm. "Is there some kind of mistake?" He didn't flinch. "No mistake. Just a seat. And a ticket with my name on it." Margot gave a light, humorless laugh. "Well, that's new." Silence followed. And then Brent leaned forward again, now less polite. "Sir, I'll ask you one more time to move, or we'll have to involve security." There it was. Malcolm exhaled slowly, folded his hands in his lap. He wasn't angry. He was exhausted, but not from travel. From this? Again and again, it was always the same script. Different players, different uniforms. "I suggest," Malcolm said, "you check the system again." Vanessa did. Her eyes lingered longer on the screen this time. Then she paled. Malcolm Raye, verified, Tier 1, and next to his name, an internal note. Owner Synercore Holdings, board seat SkyLynx Parent Group. She blinked, but Brent hadn't looked. He waved his hand. Security to Gate 17A. He muttered into his comms. From 3 rows back, a voice cut through. Is he being forced to move Nia Bennett, seated quietly in 3C, phone already recording in her lap? "Because I've got it on video." Brent turned. "Ma'am, we're conducting standard operations. We ask that you stop filming." Nia didn't flinch. "No, you're singling him out. For a seat he's legally in." Another pause. Malcolm didn't smile, but something behind his eyes shifted. He could have said it then. He could have pulled rank, but he didn't. He waited. 7 more minutes would pass before security arrived. 7 minutes that would change the lives of everyone on that aircraft. The aisle was quiet, still, like the air before a thunderstorm. Brent's voice echoed faintly through the cabin as he spoke into his shoulder mic, calling in for ground security. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. A few glanced toward Malcolm. Some averted their eyes. Others whispered, but no one moved. Malcolm stayed seated, not out of pride, not out of defiance. He stayed because he'd earned it, because dignity doesn't bargain. Across the aisle, Margot Ellison sat stiffly in seat 1C, her lips pressed in a line, face flushed. She held her designer bag on her lap like a badge of status. She didn't look at him anymore. She looked past him, through him, as if doing so might erase the mistake of the airline placing someone like him in the space she believed belonged to her. Vanessa rechecked the passenger manifest. Her hands trembled slightly now. She had read the name wrong before. No, not wrong. She had dismissed it. Malcolm Raye. She'd assumed. They always did. She glanced again at the terminal codes next to his name. Board-level access. Tier 1 override. Owner Synercore Holdings. Synercore wasn't just a tech firm. It was a multinational infrastructure conglomerate. The same company that had rescued SkyLynx Airlines from financial collapse 3 years earlier with a massive strategic buyout. The same company that currently held 2 seats on the airline's executive board. Malcolm Raye wasn't just another passenger. He was SkyLynx royalty, but no one had recognized him. And why would they? He flew quiet. He flew alone. Always. Never used his full privileges. Never called attention to himself. That, too, was a form of protest. He had built his legacy in silence, and now they were tearing it apart for Margot Ellison's comfort. From row 3, Nia Bennett kept filming quietly. Her phone rested against her travel pouch. A soft red light blinked. She whispered to the man beside her, "His name is Malcolm Raye. I think he's with Sinner Corps. I recognize him from a Forbes article. He's not just some businessman. He owns part of this airline." The man, a middle-aged father with 2 kids in economy, blinked. "Wait. Seriously?" "Yeah. And they're calling security on him." It was spreading now, one ripple at a time. Back in 1A, Malcolm finally spoke. His voice was low and steady. "You might want to check the flight crew roster and maybe call operations." Brent scoffed. "Sir, this is not the time for..." But then Vanessa leaned in. Her voice had changed. "Brent, I think he's not just a passenger." Brent turned sharply. "What, I ran the manifest again. He's marked Tier 1. There's an owner's flag on his ID." Brent stared at her. Malcolm said nothing, just folded his hands again. Waited. The kind of wait that comes from patience earned in boardrooms, from holding silence while others talk themselves into a corner. He didn't have to speak. The system would do it for him. And then the security officers arrived. 2 men in Navy uniforms stepped onto the aircraft. Calm. Professional. "Mr. Raye," one asked. Approaching. Malcolm turned to him. Still seated. "Yes. We were told there's been an issue with your seating." "No issue on my end," Malcolm replied. "I boarded early. Sat in the seat I selected. The airline tried to relocate me for the convenience of another passenger. I declined." The officer nodded, looked to Brent. Brent stepped forward, but his voice wavered slightly now. "There's been a miscommunication. One of our regular Diamond guests prefers seat 1A, and we were trying to..." The second officer raised his hand, stopping him. "Is this passenger carrying a valid boarding pass for seat 1A?" "Yes," Vanessa admitted quietly. "Then, this is not a security matter," the officer said. He turned back to Malcolm. "You're free to remain in your seat." "Sir," Brent flushed, but it was too late. Malcolm looked up at the officers and offered a soft nod. "Thank you." The lead officer nodded. "Apologies for the disruption." They exited the aircraft. Silence fell, except for the quiet murmur of whispers traveling row to row. Margot looked straight ahead. Her cheeks were red now, not with power, but with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Embarrassment. Nia leaned forward in her seat. "They were going to remove him for her," she whispered. "And he owns part of the company." Another passenger murmured, "Unbelievable." From the cockpit, Captain Nolan appeared, older, sharp. His tone was polished when he addressed Brent. "Problem resolved." "Yes, Captain," Brent replied quickly. Nolan looked at Malcolm. "Mr. Raye, would you like to speak to operations before we push back?" Malcolm met his eyes. "Yes. Have them patch into the board line. Use my executive channel. Code Raven 11. Brent blinked. Vanessa froze. The captain nodded without another word and returned to the cockpit. 10 rows back, a teenage boy asked his mother, "Mom, who is that guy?" She leaned in and said softly, "That man might just be the reason this airline is still flying." In seat 1C, Margot shifted uncomfortably. She reached for her purse, but Malcolm raised a hand. Gently. "No need." She paused. "I didn't know," she said. He nodded once. "That's often the case." Brent stepped forward again, voice sheepish now. "Mr. Raye, I apologize. We had no idea." "You had the manifest," Malcolm replied quietly. "You had all the information. What you didn't have..." was the instinct to pause, to check, to wonder if your assumptions were wrong. Brent swallowed. Malcolm continued. You didn't just disrespect me. You disrespected protocol, equity, and you made a decision based on comfort, not correctness. Vanessa opened her mouth to speak, but she couldn't find the words, and that, perhaps, was the beginning of accountability. Minutes later, the captain returned. Sir, he said to Malcolm, board ops is on the line. They'd like your decision before departure. Malcolm looked out the window. The sky beyond the tarmac was pale gold now. The morning had turned. He turned back to Captain Nolan. Hold the flight. Sir, lock the doors. No one else boards. No one else leaves. I want the crew leads removed. I'll handle the rest from operations. This plane is grounded until further notice. Captain Nolan gave a short nod. Vanessa stepped back. Brent went pale. Margot said nothing, and Nia hit the record button again. This time, it wasn't just a video, it was a reckoning. The doors sealed with a quiet thud. Captain Nolan had done as instructed. No new passengers, no departures, no crew changes without authorization from operations. And Malcolm Raye, still seated in 1A, leaned back just slightly, exhaling with the slow control of a man who'd sat through thousands of boardroom fires and learned how to burn quietly. Nia Bennett was no longer the only one filming. Row 6 had their phones out. A father from 9C was quietly typing a thread on X, formerly Twitter. The Wi-Fi hadn't been shut down yet, but the energy in the cabin had shifted. People were no longer watching out of morbid curiosity. They were witnessing a turning point. Something about Malcolm's silence, his stillness, had a gravity that pulled attention and refused to let go. In the galley, Brent was panicking. His voice dropped an octave as he whispered to Vanessa. We're screwed. He used a board-level override code. That's federal linked. I think we're actually grounded. Vanessa couldn't even speak. She was still clutching the passenger manifest, rereading Malcolm's name over and over. How had she missed it? How had she let the moment twist this far? It had been 7 minutes since the first confrontation. 7 minutes since Malcolm was asked to move for a white VIP guest who preferred his seat. Now the plane was silent, sealed, and under executive lockdown. In the cockpit, Captain Nolan patched into SkyLynx HQ. The line connected to the secure board channel, an encrypted hotline that only Tier 1 executives were authorized to use. A screen lit up beside him, displaying a grid of faces. Most were still at home, in their morning robes or sipping coffee. One by one, they looked into their cameras and froze. Is that Raye? Yes, Nolan said. What's going on? Nolan kept his voice level. We have an incident. Mr. Raye has been disrespected, removed from his selected first-class seat, and profiled by the lead flight crew. He's requested the flight be grounded. He's asked for a formal review. From the back of the cockpit, Malcolm's voice came through. I'm not requesting, I'm invoking Clause 9.2 of the Executive Code. The boardroom on the other end paused. Clause 9.2 wasn't a request. It was a command protocol, a code that superseded normal operations in the event of discriminatory misconduct involving ownership-level partners. One of the directors, Meredith Keyes, leaned closer to her screen. Malcolm, are you certain I wouldn't be calling if I wasn't? What exactly happened? Malcolm stood now, calmly, not raising his voice. He walked the aisle slowly as passengers turned toward him. Your flight crew attempted to reassign my seat for the comfort of a diamond guest. A white woman. They ignored my boarding pass, ignored protocol, called security, refused to confirm my identity, and then tried to lie when operations was brought in. He let the words settle. The boardroom on the screen blinked. Processing. One man, Arturo Chavez, cleared his throat. You want us to launch a disciplinary review? I want the crew relieved immediately. Full incident report filed. Passenger manifest preserved. All external footage secured. And I want Margot Ellison's platinum status permanently revoked. The murmurs grew louder on the other side of the screen. She's the CEO of Lumatech. Someone whispered, I'm aware. Malcolm said, she's powerful. So am I. Malcolm replied, and unlike her, I didn't try to remove someone from their seat because of how they looked. Silence. He returned to 1A. Nia Bennett's camera was still rolling, but now her hands were shaking. She whispered into the mic, unsure if she was recording a corporate takedown or a piece of history. At the rear of the plane, passengers were talking now, whispering, watching. The idea that someone like Malcolm Raye could be treated so casually removed without pause was sinking in. It wasn't just racial bias. It was institutional blindness. They'd seen a black man in a luxury seat and assumed he didn't belong. And now they were realizing he owned the seat, the plane, the route, the system itself. Vanessa walked slowly down the aisle toward him. Her hands were clasped in front of her. I didn't know, she said softly. Malcolm looked at her. I know. I just saw the pressure. The notes on the file. She's flown this route for 11 years. She tipped big. She made herself known. So you thought I was easier to move. Vanessa blinked. Her throat bobbed. I didn't think at all, she said. Malcolm tilted his head. That's the problem, Vanessa. Thinking could have changed everything. Instead, instinct won. And instincts are shaped by systems. She stood there, unmoving. I didn't want it to be like this, she added. He nodded once. Neither did I. Behind them, the cockpit door opened. Captain Nolan stepped out, his face pale. Mr. Raye, the board has approved your demands. The crew will be dismissed. You'll have a new team within the hour. Passengers are being offered rebooking and compensation. A formal statement is being drafted. Malcolm sat back in 1A. Good. What about Ms. Ellison? Let her stay. Let her see it. Let her understand what it feels like to sit in the seat you were willing to take from someone else. Captain Nolan nodded. He didn't argue. Margot sat in silence. She hadn't moved since the officers left. She hadn't spoken since being corrected. The shame sat on her shoulders like a weighted coat, and for once in her life, she didn't reach for her assistant or her lawyer or her social capital. She sat in it, steeped in it, and that, too, was justice. From behind, a girl in row 4 leaned over the seat to speak to Nia. Is this really happening? Nia looked up. Her eyes brimmed with something between awe and heartbreak. Yes, she whispered. This is happening. Outside, a catering truck pulled away from the aircraft. Inside, the sky was still. Passengers stayed seated. No one complained. No one asked to leave. For once, they were still enough to listen. Malcolm glanced out the window, then back toward the flight crew being escorted off one by one. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply closed his eyes and let the quiet sit. He had asked for no throne, no announcement, no apology blasted over the intercom. He had only asked for a seat. And when denied, he had reminded them who built the floor. Malcolm sat alone now. The seat beside him, 1B, remained empty. A silence surrounded him that wasn't just physical, it was the quiet after a storm, the kind that hangs in the air like fog, after the rain has said what it came to say. He hadn't meant to become the center of gravity in this metal shell flying nowhere. But sometimes the gravity finds you. And sometimes it's the weight you've carried all your life, finally catching up midair. His phone buzzed. Messages flooded in. From SkyLynx Legal, from his assistant, from board allies, from people he hadn't spoken to in months. But one text stopped him. It was from his sister. Short, just 3 words. I saw it. That was all. He stared at the screen, then closed his eyes. The video had gone live. Nia must have uploaded it, or someone nearby had. Either way, it was out now. Beyond this aircraft, beyond damage control. The entire world was watching. A child's voice interrupted the quiet. "Mommy, is he in trouble?" It came from row 5, a little boy leaning over his tray table, curious and unafraid. His mother hushed him gently, trying to shield him from the adult complexity unfolding around them. Malcolm turned slightly, met the boy's gaze, and offered a soft smile. "No, son, I'm not in trouble." He paused. "I'm just reminding people what trouble looks like when it wears a smile and a name tag." The boy didn't understand, but his mother looked away, her eyes brimming. Malcolm turned his face back toward the window. The clouds outside barely moved. This wasn't flight anymore, it was suspension. The kind that holds not just an aircraft, but a truth in midair, asking the world to decide where it lands. He thought about his father then. Frederick Raye had never flown first class a day in his life. The man had built furniture with his hands oak, walnut, cherry, carved initials into wooden trunks for newlyweds, painted cabinets by flashlight when the power was out. And when Malcolm was 9, his father had taken him to the airport in Birmingham to see a plane up close. They stood near the fence line as planes taxied, roared, and vanished into the sky. His father had knelt beside him and said, "One day, son, I want you to sit at the front, not because someone gives it to you, because you earned it, because you paid for it. And if someone ever tries to take it from you, you remember our dignity doesn't move for comfort, not anymore." Malcolm blinked away the memory. The ache in his chest wasn't anger. It was something softer. A quiet ache for every father who had told their son the same, and for every son who never made it far enough to test those words. A ping broke his thought. Nia Bennett, seated 2 rows back, was receiving a flurry of direct messages. Her name had started trending. People were calling her the silent witness. Journalists were reaching out. News anchors wanted her story. Some praised her for staying calm and filming. Others criticized her for not intervening sooner. She tapped out a tweet. "I filmed it so the world would believe him. Sometimes that's all we can do." She didn't send it. Not yet. Instead, she looked up at Malcolm. He turned slightly, their eyes meeting for the first time since she'd started recording. There was no anger in his eyes, just a tired knowing. The kind that recognizes the roles people play, not out of malice, but out of habit. He nodded once, almost as if to say, "Thank you. And I wish you didn't have to." The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Nolan. We are currently awaiting confirmation of a new flight crew, which will be arriving shortly. For your patience, complimentary refreshments will be provided. Please remain in your seats for the time being." Margot Ellison flinched at the sound of the captain's voice. She sat in 2A now alone, quiet, stripped of her earlier confidence. Gone was the snide tone, the amused glance toward crew members. In its place was a stunned sort of silence. Her assistant had tried calling, but the cabin was locked down. No movement, no favors. For the first time in her life, she wasn't in control. She tried to open her phone, but even there, the tide had turned. The video was everywhere. Dozens of threads had popped up, captioning the moment she snapped at Malcolm. The clip where she smirked as he was told to move. Someone had zoomed in and slowed it down. The caption read, "Privilege is smiling while dignity is questioned." Margot locked her phone. Her throat felt tight. She looked at Malcolm again. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't grandstanding. He was just there, existing. As if to say, I don't need to scream to be seen. She turned away. In the rear of the plane, Brent and Vanessa sat on the jump seats, their airline IDs now deactivated. Their faces had changed, not defensive, now just hollow. Vanessa finally whispered, "He was so calm." The whole time. Brent didn't respond. He never raised his voice. She added, "Not once." Brent closed his eyes. "That's what makes it worse." We kept pushing, and he just sat there. Do you think he knew? Brent nodded. The moment we touched his ticket, he knew exactly where this was going. He gave us every chance to back off. And we didn't, Vanessa thought. We didn't stop until it was too late. From the front, Malcolm pulled out a worn notebook from his carry-on, not a tablet, not a laptop. Just a small, brown, weathered moleskin journal. He opened it to a page titled simply, "What Dignity Costs." There were bullet points, moments, stories, fragments. 2011 hotel lobby. Bellhop hands my luggage to white consultant I'm with. 2014 Yale reunion, called staff by donor spouse. 2017 art auction, asked if I was delivering catering. He flipped to a new page. 2025 SkyLynx Flight. 128, Seat 1A, revoked without cause. Then he wrote underneath, "Outcome grounded flight. Fired crew. Witnessed truth." He set the pen down. In that moment, he felt the weight lift not completely, but just enough to breathe. Sometimes justice didn't roar. Sometimes it whispered. The doors at the front of the aircraft opened quietly. A new team stepped in. Fresh uniform, alert faces, eyes wide open. They approached Malcolm first. A new purser, an older woman named Darlene with silver-streaked curls, knelt slightly. "Mr. Raye, sir," she said softly, "I'd be honored to serve you today." With dignity, as it should have been from the start. He looked at her, saw no fear in her, no performative guilt, just sincerity. He nodded. "Let's take flight." He said, behind him, passengers sat upright, quiet but energized, as if something had shifted in them, too. The sky was waiting, and this time it would carry not just a plane, but a message. Captain Nolan stood quietly in the cockpit doorway, his hands clasped behind his back as the new crew completed pre-flight checks. He wasn't just flying a plane today, he was navigating history. The tension in the cabin had shifted. Where there had been chaos, now there was stillness. But not peace. Not yet. Peace comes after the truth is told. And the truth had only just begun to whisper. Malcolm remained in seat 1A. This time, no one questioned him. No stewardess glanced sideways. No curious executive assumed the seat beside him. He sat not as a man fighting for a seat, but as one reclaiming what was already his. He stared out the window, but his mind wasn't up there in the clouds. It was in the boardroom, because they would be watching now. The SkyLynx board of directors, the shareholders, the executives who'd grown comfortable forgetting who helped build the foundation they profited from. Malcolm had stayed quiet for years, chosen to stay behind the scenes, let others take credit. Not because he lacked power, but because he was tired of proving himself to people who never intended to see him. He had built SkyLynx with his own two hands, not the wings or the fuselage, no, but the code, the systems, the flight safety protocols that had saved thousands of lives. The AI scheduling systems used by every gate agent in the country, the biometric check-in technology. All of it had come from Malcolm's designs. He was the quiet co-founder, the backbone, the one whose name never made the interviews but always signed the final line of approval. And now that silence had ended. His phone vibrated again. This time, it wasn't his sister. It was from the SkyLynx press office. "We are aware of the incident. Please confirm if you are available for public comment." He didn't reply. He had no need to. The video had already done the talking. A whisper floated from the back of the cabin. Someone had just shown the footage to an older couple in row 17. The woman gasped, pressing her hand to her chest. The man frowned deeply, his lips tight. They weren't angry at Malcolm. They were ashamed of what had happened to him, and maybe, just maybe, of how many times they'd let moments like that pass in silence before. In row 8, a college student named Mira was live tweeting what she was witnessing. Flight 128. Everything's shifted. Everyone's quiet. And for the first time, it feels like we're in the presence of someone who's bigger than the seat they were denied. Another tweet followed moments later. They didn't know he owned the sky. But they're about to find out. Malcolm's assistant finally got through. He kept her on speaker, voice low. Malcolm, the videos hit over 8 million views, and the board her voice trailed off. He leaned forward slightly. They're calling an emergency session, not tomorrow. Now. They've pulled in every regional director, top shareholders, PR firms, legal, and there's talk of a full press release. What kind of release, Malcolm asked. A formal apology. But they're scrambling. Because word just got out you were the lead architect of the Clear Path system. A few execs are denying it. But your name is in the patents. You let them bury your role for years. Why? Malcolm took a long breath. Because I thought if I worked hard enough, the sky would remember me. There was silence on the other end. His assistant whispered, "It has." He ended the call. In row 3, Nia Bennett was still scrolling, still reading, but now her fingers trembled, not from fear, from awe. She whispered to herself, "He built this, the very thing they tried to take from him." She stood, quietly, walked forward. Passengers watched her. Some lifted their phones, others simply held their breath. She stood beside Malcolm, not asking permission, and spoke low enough that only he could hear. "Do you want me to tell them?" He looked up. His eyes were kind, but steady. "Not yet," he said. "Let the silence do the work." She nodded. "Thank you," he added. "For what?" "For staying." Back in the first-class galley, the new purser Darlene was briefing her team. She'd seen too many flights fall into dysfunction when no one dared to take responsibility. But today, responsibility sat in 1A, not demanding attention, but commanding it by his very presence. "We are not here to fix what others broke," she said to her crew. "We are here to serve every passenger with dignity, especially the one who never should have been questioned to begin with." They nodded. Captain Nolan approached her. "He's not just a passenger," Nolan said quietly. "He's a builder, a founder." Darlene's eyes widened. "So the rumors are true. He didn't just help build this company." The captain replied, "He helped build how planes fly safely across this country." A ripple passed through Darlene. Then she turned back to her team and added, "That seat didn't make him important. He made that seat meaningful." The intercom chimed. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We are now preparing for takeoff. We appreciate your patience today." In truth, no one had a choice. Malcolm folded his journal and placed it gently into the leather pouch in front of him. As the engines rumbled and the aircraft taxied forward, he closed his eyes. He remembered his mother's voice. "You can rise quietly. Son, just make sure you rise." And he had. The plane lifted from the tarmac, wheels tucking in like folded truths, finally allowed to fly. Below them, thousands of screens lit up with his face, his calm tone, his refusal to raise his voice even when his worth was challenged. Above them, the clouds parted. The sky had always been watching, and now it was listening, written in a soft, emotionally resonant American narrative voice, optimized for TTS, no dashes used. In the still air above the clouds, as Flight 128 cruised at 38,000 feet, something far more turbulent brewed miles below. Inside the SkyLynx headquarters in Atlanta, board members sat in hastily arranged chairs, suits wrinkled, faces pale, phones constantly vibrating. No one made eye contact. They had seen the video, all of them, and in the hour since it had gone live, over 25 million others had too. "He didn't even raise his voice," murmured Director Susan Eberly, scrolling through comments. "Exactly," said the General Counsel, pushing her glasses up her nose. "That's what makes it worse. There's no way to argue tone. He stayed calm, respectful, graceful. And they still removed him like a criminal," interrupted a regional VP. "They questioned his right to sit in the seat he paid for. No, the seat he created." Everyone looked at him. "What do you mean?" asked a younger executive. The VP leaned forward, whispering like the truth itself might shake the walls. Malcolm Raye is the architect of the ClearPath navigation suite. The AI diagnostic system SkyLynx has marketed as our crown jewel for 5 years. That came from his code, his patents. The room buzzed with disbelief. "But he doesn't appear in any of the media kits." "Because he chose not to," said the VP. "He took equity, not fame. Stayed in the shadows. Until now," Susan muttered. The CEO, Lawrence Monroe, entered last. His jaw was tight. His tie was off-center. "We've got less than 30 minutes before national outlets begin asking for official statements," he began, tapping the table. "I want a plan, not panic. A plan." One of the PR managers cleared her throat. "Option 1. We release a formal apology, acknowledge the error, and announce that all crew involved have been terminated." "That's already happened," said Lawrence. "Option 2, she continued, we reach out to Mr. Raye directly, offer to partner with him on a new public equity initiative, reposition him as a face of forward progress." A snort came from the far end of the table. "You mean use him to clean up our mess?" The room turned toward the voice. It was Darius Flint, the only black man on the board. He hadn't spoken yet. Until now. "No offense to anyone here," Darius said quietly. "But we all know why Malcolm stayed silent. Why he stayed in the background. Because even at the top of this very organization, there was no space made for a black man who didn't want to be palatable. He was brilliant, but not marketable to our image." "What's your suggestion then?" Lawrence asked, clearly annoyed. Darius paused. "My suggestion," he echoed. "Listen to him. Actually listen. Let the man tell his story in his own time. Don't offer him a seat now because the world's watching. He had the seat from the beginning. You just didn't see it." No one responded. Back on the plane, the tone was different. A baby in row 22 was crying softly. A flight attendant walked by, gently offering water and a warm towel to the mother. Malcolm sat still in 1A, his hands folded, his mind anything but calm. He had always believed in grace, but grace did not mean silence. Not anymore. He looked at his phone. There were 4 missed calls from national networks, 2 interview requests from international media. His LinkedIn had gone from 2,000 to over 200,000 followers in an hour. But the one message that caught his eye was from an old friend. It read simply, "It took the world 15 years to see what I saw on day 1. Don't shrink back now." He looked across the aisle and saw Nia watching him, not with pity, not even awe, but something deeper. Recognition. She smiled gently. "You okay?" He nodded. "Strange kind of day?" She leaned in slightly. "You're changing the world from a middle seat in the sky." He chuckled softly. "Guess I never needed a boardroom." A flight attendant approached with a tablet. She was young, nervous. "Sir, we just received a priority message for you. The captain says it's urgent." Malcolm took the tablet. It was a video call request from Lawrence Monroe. Malcolm tilted his head. He didn't accept right away. Instead, he stood slowly. The cabin fell silent. He turned to face the other passengers. "I know you've all been patient today, and I appreciate that," he said calmly. "But something happened before takeoff that I need to acknowledge." The flight attendants froze. The passengers leaned in. I was removed from this seat for no reason. And that's not new. It happens to people who look like me far too often. A murmur passed through the rows. "But here's what is new," Malcolm continued. "For once, it was recorded and shared and believed." Nia stood beside him now. "And it's not just about me," he said. "It's about how systems work, how dignity is sometimes a privilege, but it shouldn't be." He handed the tablet to Nia. "Play it," he said softly. She tapped the screen. The cabin monitors came alive. A short video played a documentary-style montage of Malcolm's contributions to SkyLynx over the years, his blueprints, his code, his research, his leadership. A quiet voice narrated he didn't just design the systems we fly on, he designed the standards we live by. By the end, the cabin was silent again. But this time, not from shock, from reverence. He sat back down, and when he did, it wasn't just a man returning to his seat, it was a founder reclaiming his sky. The call from Lawrence came again. Malcolm answered this time. "Malcolm," Lawrence began, "we're issuing a full apology. We want to talk about the future, equity, visibility." Giving you a seat at the Malcolm interrupted. "I don't need you to give me a seat. Lawrence, I built the table." There was a pause. "I know. I'm not interested in optics or cleanup campaigns. I'm interested in policy. Change. Not just for me. For every person who's ever been told they don't belong in the place they already earned." Lawrence hesitated. "We're listening. Then don't just listen to me. Listen to the ones you've ignored. Let this be the last time someone is punished for being unseen." He ended the call. The plane hummed on through the sky. Malcolm leaned his head back, eyes closing, not from weariness, but from clarity. This wasn't the end of the journey. It was the flight plan. And for the first time in a long time, the destination looked like justice. Soft, emotionally resonant American narrative voice, optimized for TTS with natural pauses. No dashes in the content. The sky was calm, but down on the ground, chaos brewed. Within hours of Malcolm Raye's speech mid-flight and his quiet but firm rejection of SkyLynx's damage control call, the world caught fire. Social media wasn't just reacting, it was roaring. The video now had over 42 million views. Dozens of major news outlets from CNN to the BBC had begun airing it on a loop, interspersed with stock footage of Malcolm's achievements and background on systemic racial profiling in corporate spaces. Hashtags like "He Built the Sky" and "Seat Already Earned" were trending globally. But it wasn't just trending, it was shifting hearts. And it was only morning. In a brightly lit room in New York City, SkyLynx spokesperson Danielle Trent stood frozen in front of 5 cameras. Her usual practice smile had vanished. "We recognize the gravity of what occurred on Flight 128, she read aloud, trembling slightly. SkyLynx has officially terminated all crew members involved in the incident. We have launched an internal audit, and all first-class personnel are under retraining review, effective immediately." A reporter raised her hand. "Ms. Trent, can you clarify what measures are being taken to ensure racial bias does not continue to inform boarding protocols?" Danielle blinked, her mouth opened, then closed. Backstage, a junior staffer held up a card. It read, "Own the failure." Danielle took a breath. "We failed," she said clearly. "There's no excuse." "Mr. Raye was not only a valued passenger, he was foundational to our company's history. The irony and injustice of what happened are not lost on us. It is our responsibility to rebuild this culture. In another part of the country, in a quiet cafe in Denver, 3 black engineers sat huddled around a tablet. "That's him," said one, tapping the screen. "Malcolm Raye. I studied his traffic load balancing algorithm in grad school." Another engineer looked up, her eyes wide. "Wait, that's the same Malcolm who got dragged off the flight, dragged off the seat he helped build." The third murmured, "He made that navigation suite they use on every single aircraft." A silence fell between them. Then, one by one, they pulled out their phones. Applications for positions at SkyLynx plummeted 92% that day among tech professionals of color. Meanwhile, aboard Flight 128, the tension had taken on a strange kind of hush. No one spoke loudly. No one laughed. People just sat with the weight of what they'd seen. Naya turned to Malcolm, her voice soft. "I think people are finally beginning to see it. The full picture." He gave a faint smile. "It's not about being seen," he said. "It's about being respected when you already showed up." There was a quiet pause. "You didn't have to stand up the way you did," she added. "I didn't," he agreed. "But if I didn't say something today, I wouldn't recognize myself tomorrow." Nia nodded. "I get that." Suddenly, there was movement at the front of the cabin. A new flight crew had come aboard during the emergency stop in Chicago. The lead attendant, a tall black woman named Alana Fields, stepped forward with composure and dignity. She addressed the passengers calmly. "Good morning. I want to personally thank each of you for your patience today. I also want to acknowledge something else. What happened earlier should never happen on any flight, to anyone. We are not here just to offer service. We are here to preserve dignity. You are not invisible on this plane." Her voice wavered slightly, but she didn't flinch. A soft murmur of appreciation rippled through the cabin. An elderly woman clapped once. A younger man followed. Within seconds, polite applause filled the air. Alana caught Malcolm's eye and gave a respectful nod. He returned it, back at SkyLynx headquarters. The executive team had entered damage control mode, but something had shifted. The walls felt thinner. The hierarchy suddenly looked brittle. In the middle of the boardroom, Lawrence Monroe stood facing a group of advisors. His voice wasn't loud, but it held strain. "We have a crisis, not just a PR disaster. This is about moral accountability, and it starts with us." Susan Eberly raised a hand. "Then we have to consider resignations," she said firmly. "We can't ask the lower rungs to bear all of this." Lawrence looked her in the eye. "I'm already drafting mine." The room went silent. One of the younger executives, barely 30, swallowed hard. "Sir, if you go, the investors may follow." Lawrence gave a tired smile. Then, maybe they weren't investing in the right thing to begin with. Meanwhile, Malcolm's phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from his younger sister, Celeste. "I'm proud of you." Dad would have cried. He stared at it for a long moment. He hadn't thought about his father in months. But now, sitting in a place meant to be a reward, that had become a battleground. Malcolm remembered the time he was 13. His father had taken him on a Greyhound bus from Atlanta to Memphis. The back of the bus had been half empty, but the white driver insisted they move to the rear anyway. His father had obeyed. But later, at a stop for gas, he said something Malcolm never forgot. Dignity is sometimes quieter than anger, but never weaker. Malcolm wiped his eyes quietly. Nia gently reached over and offered him a fresh tissue. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. When the pilot came on over the intercom, his voice was clearer than it had been all day. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are on final descent into Los Angeles. On behalf of SkyLynx, we thank you for your patience and your presence today. We have been humbled." That was all he said, but it was enough. As the wheels touched down and the aircraft rolled to a slow halt, Malcolm looked out the window. Camera crews, reporters, protesters, supporters, some holding up signs. One read, "Dignity has landed." He turned to Nia. "You ready for this?" she asked. "I was born ready," he replied, his voice calm, but fierce with purpose. The door opened. The light from the jet bridge flooded the cabin. Malcolm stood, not just to exit, but to walk into a world that was finally watching. But this time, it wasn't about watching. It was about changing. Soft, emotionally resonant American narrative voice, optimized for TTS with natural pauses, no dashes in the content. The moment Malcolm Raye stepped off Flight 128, the noise of the world hit him like a rising tide. The air was thick with heat and tension. Reporters pressed close behind the barricades, their voices clashing like static. Camera lenses zoomed in, flashes popped, and somewhere in the background, someone chanted his name. A wave of humanity waited, some in outrage, some in hope, all with their eyes fixed on him. But Malcolm didn't flinch. He adjusted the cuff of his jacket, glanced briefly at Nia, who walked beside him, and took a deep breath. His steps were measured, not rushed. He wasn't there to put on a show. He was there because history had called him by name. As he made his way down the corridor, a SkyLynx representative, one Malcolm didn't recognize, hurried up, panting slightly. "Mr. Raye, I'm so sorry. We didn't expect this kind of crowd. If you'd like, we have a private route through the terminal." Malcolm stopped. "I think I'll take the public one," he replied evenly. The rep hesitated, eyes darting. But Malcolm had already moved past her. The airport terminal was filled with faces. Some filmed, some simply watched. And then, as if cued by a shared heartbeat, people began to clap, not the loud, boisterous kind, but slow, firm, and deeply respectful. Malcolm didn't smile. He nodded. A man doesn't smile when walking through fire. He just walks taller. In the arrivals lounge, he paused as a little boy, maybe 6 years old. Curly hair, wide brown eyes stepped out from the crowd and reached toward him. His mother gasped, but Malcolm knelt down before she could pull the boy back. The child looked up at him and asked simply, "Were you scared?" Malcolm looked into those eyes and answered softly, "Yes, but I stood anyway." The boy smiled, then hugged him. The mother mouthed, "Thank you." And Malcolm stood again, his heart heavier and lighter at once. Back home in Atlanta, the fallout had already begun. SkyLynx's board had been summoned for a closed emergency meeting. Investors were jittery. Civil rights groups were mobilizing. And most significantly, the Department of Transportation had opened an official inquiry into the company's internal equity practices. But something else was brewing too, something more powerful than scandal. Solidarity. Pilots from 3 other airlines had issued an open letter of support, calling for universal anti-bias retraining. A coalition of black tech founders released a pledge that same day, stating, if they can remove Malcolm Raye, they can erase us all. We will not let them. Inside his temporary apartment, quiet, minimalist, with windows that caught the afternoon sun, Malcolm sat with Nia, sipping tea. Neither spoke at first, but finally, Nia broke the silence. "Do you ever regret building SkyLynx?" Malcolm looked into his cup. Steam swirled above it, soft and ghost-like. "I regret who we let run it," he answered quietly. "But no, I don't regret building something that could have meant freedom for people like me." She nodded. then asked, "What would your mother say right now?" He laughed once, softly. She'd say I finally walked into the room with my name on the door. A pause, even if they tried to lock it from the inside. Later that evening, Malcolm walked alone to the rooftop garden. From there, he could see the city lights stretch out like stars that had come down to rest. The wind carried the hum of life below. He stood quietly, listening. He thought of the little boy, the look in his eyes. He thought of his father on the Greyhound, and his mother, who scrubbed floors for 30 years but made Malcolm memorize Baldwin quotes by heart. He thought of every quiet moment he'd sacrificed to be calm when others shouted, to think when others reacted. And then he pulled out his phone. A text came in, not from Celeste this time, but from Lawrence Monroe. "Malcolm, I'm stepping down. The board has approved your recommendation. I'm sorry. I hope this leads to something better." Malcolm stared at it for a while. Then he typed, "It's not about something better. It's about becoming something whole." And then he did something unexpected. He called Lawrence. The older man answered quickly. "Malcolm." "Lawrence." Silence. Then Malcolm said, "You did the right thing." Lawrence sighed. "Too late, though." "No," Malcolm said, his voice firm. "Not too late. But not enough either." Lawrence exhaled. "What do I do now?" Malcolm answered without pause. "Listen. Learn. And when someone tells you their experience, don't measure it by how uncomfortable it makes you." Lawrence didn't reply immediately. But when he did, it was different. Honest. "I was afraid to face you." "I know," Malcolm said. "I kept telling myself it wasn't personal, that it was policy." Malcolm gave a small, dry laugh. "And that's the problem, Lawrence. When policy becomes the excuse for injustice, the system stops needing a villain, it just runs on silence." A long breath came from the other end. "Will you come back?" Malcolm looked out over the city again. "No," he said. "But I'll build something that makes sure no one else needs to." The call ended. The next morning, headlines flooded every screen. CEO steps down after viral flight bias incident. Malcolm Raye refuses to return. Announces new aviation ethics initiative. From founder to fighter, Malcolm Raye speaks out. In an exclusive televised interview with journalist Renee Lewis, Malcolm sat calmly as millions watched. "Mr. Raye," Renee began, "what do you want people to remember most about what happened on Flight 128? He looked straight into the camera. That dignity doesn't arrive with a title, and it can't be taken away with a seat. She paused, then leaned forward. "And what's next for you?" He smiled, just faintly. "Rebuilding the sky from the inside out." And for the first time in days, he let himself exhale. Not because it was over, but because something real had just begun, written in soft, emotionally resonant American narrative voice, optimized for TTS delivery with natural pacing and emotional flow. No dashes used in the content. 3 days after Malcolm Raye's televised interview, a quiet shift began to spread like ripples on a still pond. It started small, a handwritten note left at the front desk of his temporary office. Then a folded letter slipped under the door by a stranger who refused to give her name. Then a package, carefully wrapped, with no return address inside. A framed photo of a Tuskegee airman with a handwritten message. "You stood because we couldn't always. Thank you for standing." Malcolm read every word. He didn't respond publicly. Not yet, but each note carved something deeper into the walls of his resolve. Not anger, not revenge, just clarity. He spent hours walking, Atlanta had always been a city of contradiction for him. The skyline glimmered with glass and steel, but its streets still whispered stories of wounds both old and ongoing. There was a tension here he understood well, the ache of trying to belong while being reminded that belonging could be revoked at any moment. On the fifth morning, he stood in front of a low-rise building in West End. The sign was faded, the roof slanted, but to Malcolm it looked like home. He called Nia. "I need a team," he said. She laughed on the other end. "You already have one." The building became their headquarters. They called it the ground level, a nod to the belief that real change never starts from the top. It grows upward, from roots, from people. Malcolm didn't try to rebuild SkyLynx. He let the board finish its damage control, let them shift faces around, issue glossy statements. He was building something different now, something without polish, something that could survive storms. He called it the Clear Altitude Initiative, its purpose to document and dismantle systemic bias in aviation, from hiring to in-flight conduct to passenger treatment. But more than that, it was a promise that no person would be humiliated in the skies without someone listening on the ground. A week later, the first seminar was held in the ground level. A retired black pilot spoke first, then a Latina flight attendant who described years of being passed over for promotions, then a nervous young man, barely 20, who had been removed from a flight last year after another passenger felt uncomfortable sitting next to him. Malcolm sat in the back, listening. He didn't speak. Not yet. That evening, he returned home and sat with Celeste. She had flown in from Seattle, suitcase still half unpacked. "You look older," she said. "I feel it," he admitted. She touched his hand. "But you're not smaller." He smiled at that, then looked at her. Serious now. "Do you think it was worth it?" Celeste tilted her head. "You mean the fight?" He nodded. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "The fight was never a choice. Malcolm, just the shape of the road. The real question is how far do you want to walk it?" He exhaled, leaned back into the couch. "As far as it takes." The next morning, an unexpected call came in. It was from Marianne Reyes, chairwoman of the National Aviation Ethics Board. "I saw your interview," she began. "I appreciate you watching," Malcolm replied. She cleared her throat. "I was hoping you might consider consulting on a new set of federal guidelines. We're forming a committee. We need people with your perspective." Malcolm was silent. "Mr. Raye." He finally said, "I'll do it, but only if we include passengers who've lived through discrimination, not just executives in suits." She paused, then smiled. "That's exactly why I called you." Later that week, a letter arrived. This one wasn't anonymous. It came from Geneva Whitmore, an 87-year-old woman who wrote in slanted cursive. "I watched the news with my granddaughter." It read, "She's 8. She turned to me and said, 'Grandma, why did they move the kind man?' And I didn't have an answer. I'm writing to tell you I'm sorry, and thank you." She'll grow up knowing that standing up doesn't mean shouting. Sometimes it just means not sitting down. Malcolm closed the letter and sat with it pressed to his chest for a long time. The ripple had reached places he couldn't have planned for. 2 weeks after the Clear Altitude Initiative launched, a viral video made headlines. A white businessman berated a flight attendant for asking him to move seats he hadn't paid for. When the captain threatened to remove the flight attendant instead, a black woman stood up and calmly said, "I've seen this story before. This time, I won't be silent." The plane erupted in applause. The flight attendant kept her job. And Malcolm, he never even knew her name, but he saw the clip. And for the first time since Flight 128, he allowed himself a full smile. One night, as he walked through the ground level after everyone had left, Malcolm paused at the bulletin board. On it were pinned dozens of notes, quotes, memories, sketches from children. A simple drawing in crayon showed a brown man with a crown standing next to a broken plane, helping others walk forward. Malcolm reached up and touched the drawing. He remembered his own childhood. How often he sat on porch steps, staring at the sky, wondering if it would ever truly belong to him. And now, perhaps, it did. Not because he'd reclaimed his seat, but because he'd given others the courage to hold theirs. The work had only begun. The storm had passed, but the air was still thick with the smell of change, and Malcolm Raye, calm, composed, rooted, was exactly where he was meant to be, at the center of the ripple, written in a soft, deep, emotionally resonant American narrative voice, optimized for TTS with natural pacing, emotional silence, and no dashes in content. The morning fog curled around the trees outside Malcolm's window like breath held too long. Atlanta had turned cooler overnight, and there was a hush in the city that felt almost holy. It was just past 6 when the knock came. He wasn't expecting anyone. He opened the front door in slippers, hoodie still pulled over his head. A courier stood on the porch, holding a small weatherproof envelope. Special delivery for Mr. Malcolm Raye. Required signature, the man said. Malcolm signed without speaking, closed the door quietly behind him, and walked the envelope to the kitchen counter. The return address stopped him cold. L. Simon Roanoke, Virginia. He hadn't seen that name in over 30 years. His hands trembled slightly as he peeled open the seal. Inside was a letter on heavy cream paper, folded with careful, practiced symmetry. He sat down, breathed, unfolded it, and began to read. Malcolm, I watched the interview. Didn't recognize you at first. Then I heard your voice. I never forgot that voice. You might not remember me, but I remember you. You were 22. I was 24. We both worked the overnight shift in Baggage 3 at Roanoke Regional. You once said, "Someday I'll be on the other side of this counter." I didn't believe you. I want you to know now I was wrong, and I'm sorry I ever laughed. Lisa. He froze. Lisa Simon. They had worked together for 2 summers. She was quiet, sarcastic, always scribbling in the margins of airline cargo logs. She had a limp from a car accident no one talked about. They were never close, but she was one of the few who didn't make fun of him for dreaming too big. He kept reading. You told me once your biggest fear wasn't failure. It was that you'd be treated like a stranger in your own success. I saw what they did to you on that plane. They didn't just take your seat. They tried to make you feel like you didn't belong in something you built. That's the part that hurt me the most. Because you were right. It happened to me too. But I didn't stand. You did. I just wanted you to know I remember. I'm proud of you. And if you're ever in Roanoke, there's a bench behind Gate 4 that still has our initials scratched into it. I made sure they never removed it. Lisa Malcolm closed the letter and pressed it to his lips. He remembered now. The bench. The scratched letters. ML plus LS, carved one long, boring Tuesday with a borrowed Swiss Army knife and too much hope. He sat there in silence for a long time. Later that day, he told Nia about the letter. She leaned against the window, arms folded. You ever think about how many people remember you when you weren't trying to be seen? She asked. He nodded. All the time now. She looked at him with something between affection and fire. You ever think maybe this fight started long before you were ever on that plane? That question stayed with him all week. On Friday, he stood in the middle of the ground-level lobby, watching as new volunteers carried in boxes of materials. People were showing up from as far as Ohio and Maine. Someone had even flown in from London to study the model of the Clear Altitude Initiative. It was working, but Malcolm felt something else stirring. An itch in his spirit. A need to return. He booked a flight to Roanoke that night, not in first class, not in disguise, just as himself. At the airport gate, he walked past the same kind of polished counters where he used to load luggage. He passed a young agent tapping on a touchscreen, barely old enough to remember dial-up internet. The past felt close, not in a haunting way, but in a quiet undercurrent, like a river beneath a street. When he landed, he didn't go to a hotel. He went straight to Gate 4. And there it was, the bench, still worn, still tucked behind a column where no one ever looked. He ran his fingers over the initials. They had faded, but were still there. He sat down slowly. The overhead speakers played the same soft jazz they had 30 years ago. Somehow, still crackly, still distant. He listened to it without judgment. After a moment, he pulled a pen from his jacket and added one more line to the carving. This time, it simply read, "I came back." He stayed there until the last flight left the gate. Then he walked out under the stars. And for the first time in weeks, he cried. Not from anger, not from shame, just the quiet ache of remembering who he used to be and forgiving himself for the times he tried too hard to forget it. Back in Atlanta, Celeste was waiting. She didn't ask where he had been. She simply placed a warm hand on his shoulder and said, "Welcome home." That night, Malcolm sat on the edge of his bed and pulled out a journal. He wrote for the first time in over a year. He wrote about Lisa, about the bench, about the day he almost walked away from his dream. He wrote about every moment he had ever been made to feel small, and how none of those moments had the power to erase the fact that he was still standing, still here, still rising. When he finished, he closed the book, exhaled, and finally slept, written in a soft, deep, emotionally resonant American narrative voice, optimized for TTS with natural pacing, emotional silence, and no dashes in content. The hearing room was colder than expected, not just in temperature, but in tone. Rows of polished wooden chairs faced the long curved panel where the committee sat. A dozen men and women in suits, clipped expressions, and carefully calibrated sympathies. Malcolm adjusted his tie, exhaled, and stepped forward to the microphone. He wasn't alone. To his right sat Naya, notebook open, steady as stone. To his left, a row of supporters from the Clear Altitude Initiative, wearing pins that read simply, "Dignity Flies First." Senator Elkins from Iowa, gray-haired and unsmiling, tapped his gavel once. We are now in session to hear testimony regarding the incident aboard Horizon Flight 92 and the broader implications of systemic bias in commercial aviation. There was a brief silence. Then he turned to Malcolm. "Mr. Raye, you may begin." Malcolm looked out over the room. It wasn't just politicians staring back at him. It was press, passengers, flight crew. He saw a woman in the third row who looked just like the flight attendant who had humiliated him. And sitting beside her, gripping her hand, was a young boy who couldn't have been more than 10. Eyes wide, not with judgment, but with hope. Malcolm leaned into the mic. "I was removed from my seat not because of a boarding error, not because of a safety concern, but because someone decided I didn't look like I belonged in that seat." He paused. "That's what this is about." Murmurs spread through the chamber. Senator Elkins raised a brow. And what seat was that Malcolm met his gaze? 1A. Elkins jotted something down, expression unreadable. Malcolm continued. But the real seat taken wasn't just a number. It was a place in the story, a place in the sky where black dignity is still questioned, still negotiated, still denied. Silence. Then, a young congresswoman on the far right leaned forward. "Mr. Raye, with all due respect, are you suggesting this was an intentional act of racism I'm saying?" Malcolm replied evenly. "That systemic bias doesn't need a memo. It lives in patterns. It breathes through decisions that get made when no one thinks they're being watched." The room stiffened. Nia gave him a quick nod. He pressed on. "For 30 years, I've worked in aviation. I helped design the very software that handles boarding logistics for over 40% of U.S. carriers. My name is printed on the patents. And yet, on that flight, I was treated like excess baggage." He let the words linger. Somewhere, a reporter's pen stopped scribbling. He softened his tone. "This isn't about me getting my seat back. It's about the passenger after me. And the one after that. It's about the teenage girl who will one day sit in first class and not be asked 3 times if she's lost. It's about ending the silent humiliation that travels with us like carry-ons no one checks." A hush fell again. And then applause. Not from the panel, but from the gallery. Not loud, but real. Senator Elkins rapped his gavel again. "Order, please." But the mood had shifted. For the first time in hours, Malcolm saw in their eyes something flickering. Not pity, not doubt, but reckoning. After the hearing, reporters swarmed the steps of the Capitol. Malcolm stood calmly, answering questions with patience, care, and measured precision. Then one voice cut through the crowd. "Mr. Raye, do you believe airlines should be federally penalized for discrimination at this level?" Malcolm paused. Nia looked at him. He turned back toward the cameras. "I believe accountability shouldn't require scandal. It should be built into the takeoff." The next morning, the front page of the New York Standard ran the headline, "Dignity Must Fly. First, Malcolm Raye demands reform." By noon, more than 60,000 former airline employees had signed a letter of solidarity. Major airlines released rushed diversity statements. But the Clear Altitude Initiative issued something else entirely. A blueprint. It was 32 pages long. Clear metrics, real standards, training reforms, anonymous passenger reporting channels, flight crew accountability tied to bonuses. It wasn't a call-out. It was an invitation. And suddenly, it wasn't just passengers listening. Pilots, baggage staff, gate agents, retired stewards, executives, they began showing up at ground level's headquarters, volunteering to help. One by one. By the end of the week, a young man from Idaho who had been fired for speaking up about a racial incident in 2017 was now leading digital training development. A woman from Detroit who had left aviation after being harassed mid-flight became head of outreach. It was becoming more than a movement. It was becoming a system, a new one, rooted in visibility, not vengeance. On Friday evening, Malcolm sat alone in his office, staring at the city lights. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Celeste. "Proud of you. Dad would be too." He hadn't cried since Roanoke. But now, alone with the night, he let it come. Grief and grace, tangled together, the cost of carrying the world with calm. And then a knock on the glass. Nia stepped in, holding a folder. "What's this?" Malcolm asked. "Flight schedules," she said. "We're going up again." He looked at her, puzzled. "Clear altitude isn't just ground-based anymore." She smiled. "We got certified. Our first training flight departs next month from Atlanta. And you, sir, are in 1A. He blinked, for the first time in weeks. Laughter came out of him without effort. "I guess we built it, huh?" he whispered. "No," she said, placing the folder on his desk. "You remembered it?" Malcolm Raye paused at the jet bridge, the familiar hum of engines vibrating through the metal floor. He checked his boarding pass one last time. Clear altitude flight CA-101, seat 1A. No hesitation. He was exactly where he belonged. The cabin of the Embraer 195 gleamed in soft morning light. The seats, reupholstered in gentle earth tones, carried the clear altitude emblem embroidered on the headrests. No crew members stood waiting to ask him to move. Instead, Captain Marcus Reed, a black pilot with a gentle smile, greeted him by name. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Raye," Marcus said. "It's an honor to have you with us today." Malcolm returned the smile. "Thank you, Captain Reed. It's an honor to fly with you." As he settled into 1A, he took a deep breath and let his shoulders relax. Around him, the cabin looked like any other first class, yet everything felt different. The seatbelt sign flicked off, and the purser, Alana Fields, whom he had met 3 weeks earlier, moved gracefully through the aisle, offering warm towels and fresh water. "Good morning, Mr. Raye," she said softly. "Would you like water or tea today?" "Tea, please," he replied. Her eyes held a quiet gratitude. "Thank you for making this possible." He nodded. He knew she was referring to the new training and protocols that had transformed her career, her life, and the lives of thousands of passengers who would now board planes feeling seen instead of invisible. In 1C, Nia Bennett leaned forward, phone in hand, but ready to close the app on her screen. "How does it feel?" she whispered. Malcolm closed his eyes for a moment. "It feels like coming home." She smiled. "We did it." A flight attendant slid the tea into his cup holder. He picked up the cup and inhaled the steam. Jasmine Parker, a trainee who had once been told she was too soft for first-class service, stood by with confidence that gleamed brighter than any diamond emblem. "Mr. Raye," she said, using her best professional tone combined with genuine warmth. "It's a privilege to serve you today." Her voice held no hint of pity, no patronizing lilt, just respect by default, and it warmed Malcolm more than the tea ever could. From 2A, a young black man barely 20 approached. He held an embossed card. "Mr. Raye," he said, "I just wanted to thank you. I was kicked off a flight last year for the same reason, but because of you, I applied to Clear Altitude's ambassador program. I'm now training to be a flight attendant." Malcolm's chest tightened. The ripple had become a wave. "Thank you for sharing that with me," he said softly. The man returned to his own seat as the engines roared to life and the plane began to taxi. Captain Reed's voice came through the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Clear Altitude Flight 101. Under the command of Captain Marcus Reed, we're committed to making this flight experience not just safe, but equitable. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy the journey." The cabin remained quiet. No one fumbled for personal space. No one glanced suspiciously at their neighbor. Everyone was simply present. Malcolm gazed out the window. The runway lights cued behind him like pearls on velvet. As the plane accelerated, he thought of his father and the bench in Roanoke, of Lisa Simon's letter, of every silent humiliation turned into a call for justice, of every person who had taken his stand and made it their own. They lifted off. The city of Atlanta blurred below. Miles of roads and buildings and small acts of kindness and cruelty melded into the night. The higher the plane climbed, the smaller those divisions felt. In the cabin, Jasmine distributed blankets and headphones, offering friendly advice on how to use the seat controls. She checked on each passenger as if they were family. Her laughter floated through the air, gentle and unforced. Malcolm leaned forward. "Jasmine, that laugh of yours just lit up this cabin." She blushed. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." He thought of how she had almost walked away from aviation because of microaggressions. Now she was the one setting the tone for others. Across the aisle, Captain Reed's face appeared on a small monitor. He gave Malcolm a thumbs up. Malcolm tapped the screen in thanks. Moments later, Nia passed him a document titled Clear Altitude In-Flight Equity Charter. He read the opening lines. "We commit to upholding human dignity above all else. We pledge to confront bias in any form. We promise every passenger respect, regardless of appearance, station, or name." He closed the document gently, as though closing a sacred text. He stood and walked to the front of the cabin. The passengers looked up in gentle curiosity. "Thank you for joining us tonight," he began. "I want you to know this flight is more than a journey between cities. It is a symbol of what happens when we choose respect over assumption, empathy over indifference. Tonight, first class is not defined by price, but by principle." A ripple of applause passed through the cabin, not intrusive, but heartfelt. He returned to his seat, the cabin dimmed to soft lighting. Quiet music played. Each passenger settled in with the new crew and the new promise, eyes reflecting the low glow of dignity restored. In 1B, Celeste Ray sat quietly. She had flown in from Seattle to be here. He leaned over. Not a bad seat. Right. She reached for his hand. Not bad at all. He squeezed her hand, his gaze sweeping the cabin once more. Above them, the sky remained vast and open. No walls, no borders, just air and the promise of flight. He closed his eyes and leaned back into 1A, his heartbeat steady and sure, like the engines beneath them. This time, he felt no question of belonging, only belonging itself. The turbulence of injustice had become smooth flight, and in the gentle hum of progress, Malcolm Raye drifted toward a future he had helped build for everyone. As our flight comes in for landing, remember that every passenger deserves respect, no matter their name or seat number. Malcolm Raye's journey shows us that true courage isn't loud, it's unwavering, patient, and insists on justice even when the odds are stacked against you. Let his story remind us to stand up for dignity and speak out against every act of discrimination we witness. Love wins when we refuse to look away. If this story moved you, tap like, share with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more powerful journeys that challenge the sky itself. Until next time, fly with compassion and never let anyone tell you you don't belong.